What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be taking you guys through a wildcard rating video. So yes, I asked you guys over on my Twitter page at DayvyFPL on Friday for your guys' wildcard drafts in two scenarios. The first one, if you guys were actually wildcarding, but then also wanted to get quite a large sample size. So I also selected those of you guys who aren't using the wildcard, and I basically said if you were going to use the chip, what would your current setup be? So that's exactly what this video is going to be about. I'm going to be going through 4 different wildcard drafts, so don't worry, not going to be going over the same players for the entire video. Got quite a variety of different combinations that we're going to be going over, and this video will be for both of you guys using the chip and for those of you who aren't, because now if you aren't using the chip, you can get some inspiration hopefully for those free transfers, maybe a formation change, maybe you want to go from a 3-5-2 to a 3-4-3, maybe you can get some combinations here that you guys can use those free transfers for, or maybe you can just get a draft that you currently want to have in about 3 game weeks time, because just remember, if you are going to be using the wild card, you want to kind of prepare for the upcoming game weeks, not kind of only one single game week 4. You want to kind of get some longevity out of it, so maybe with those free transfers you can get a similar draft to these managers in the next couple game weeks. But if you are using the wild card, obviously this video is going to be highly relatable for you guys, because you can see drafts, see some variation that you guys can kind of go for, and we'll be going over some talking points, and maybe that gives you some more clarity on those FPL decisions. So that's something you guys are interested in. Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So I did mention that the amount of drafts that we have in this specific video is going to be 4, and I try to select very different kind of drafts. You're going to see some no Salah drafts, some no Ronaldo drafts, for example, because I wanted to give some variety, and as I said, not talk about the exact same players for the next 15 minutes or so. So if you didn't feature on this video, I do apologize, but maybe just relate your draft to the one that's the most similar throughout this video. And if you do have any comments, just drop them down below and I will get to those questions. I know the wild card can be quite a stressful thing, and I know if you are using an early wild card, it probably adds to that pressure because you want to get off to a good start. So just drop those comments down below and I will reply to all of them as I usually do. But in terms of my own team, I have not activated the wildcard at all. I'll probably be discussing this in the ultimate guide and the team selection coming up later on this week. I just want to absorb as much information as possible. I'm not saying that I won't activate it. I might, in FPL things change quite quickly in a short amount of time. So maybe just stay tuned and we'll see if I do activate it. But right now, I don't think I will. And I actually don't think it's going to be much that forces me to use the chip. Now going on to price rises, because I do think those of you guys who are watching this video, probably the majority of you are using the wildcard. So I just wanted to say that please monitor the price rises. If you guys go over to fantasyfootballfix.com, they have a pretty good price predictor tool, and on the wildcard you want to kind of be buying players that are rising, selling players that are going to drop, and try and increase that team value as much as possible heading into that game week 4 deadline. So please, I just want to give this a reminder, please do make use of the price rises and the price drops to your advantage if you have activated the wildcard chip already. But now going on to the first draft, and you'll see that we kind of end off with the kind of maverick draft. In the middle we have some more kind of template drafts, but the first one we're going to be going over is from Michael Ultis. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Michael. If it's Michael, I do apologize. But this draft was actually quite interesting because you'll see it's missing one main man, and that's going to be CR7 or Cristiano Ronaldo, who's newly just signed for Manchester United. And the reason why this is quite kind of maverick for me is that the majority of managers who are wildcarding will definitely have the Portuguese striker in their kind of wildcard drafts, and that might have actually been the reason that the majority of wildcarders actually ended up using the chip, was that they wanted to get the Portuguese striker in as soon as possible. They're going to captain him in game week 4, and I can perfectly understand that. So that's why when Mikkel's draft popped up in my kind of notifications, I did take note of it and I wanted to cover it, because I think there might be those of you out there who are on the chip that actually have a similar thinking to this specific FPL manager. And why I don't actually have a problem with this is that I think in FPL we kind of want to fit as many premiums as possible, but we did mention in that kind of valuation video that we did do in preseason that the premium assets actually don't hold that much value per million if you're not going to captain them. And you can't simply captain Mo Salah, Lukaku and Ronaldo every single game week. Yes, you might have a good rotation there. Maybe you have a captaincy plan where you captain a one and then the other every next game week or so, but I do think the advantages of the premium assets are definitely in the captaincy, and that's why I think at least 2 premiums is perfectly fine. And if you look at game week 4, that's probably where you're going to look at not captaining Mo Salah, because that Leeds fixture might be a little bit hit or miss for Liverpool. So I can understand Lukaku, Ronaldo are the best options to kind of go for. And if you're not going to go for Ronaldo, you're going to go for Lukaku, and he has a perfectly fine fixture in the upcoming game against Aston Villa at home. And also remember that Aston Villa will be without Martinez in goal, and I mean, just imagine Martinez not being in goal for Aston Villa last season, how many goals they would have conceded. I can honestly see that Lukaku is basically basically guaranteed to get FPL points in this game, and that's why I think from a captaincy point of view, perfectly fine option to go for. In my personal point of view, I think that I would probably rather go for Ronaldo because I think he's as equal, if not a better option against Newcastle at home. And that's why I think it's easier to kind of downgrade Ronaldo to the cheaper Lukaku than go the other way around. But if you really want to go for Lukaku, 100% fine in my opinion. But my recommendation would probably be start off with Ronaldo for the next 3 game weeks. And then when United's fixtures get hard about game week 7 to game week 14 or 15, you can simply just downgrade him to Lukaku and upgrade another department. Because Chelsea's fixtures from game week 7 onwards look absolutely stellar, and that's why I definitely would recommend him from game week 7 onwards. But if you really want to go for Lukaku, as I said, perfectly fine to go for. It's your wild card, whatever you want to do with it. And I can honestly agree with you that game week 4 is a great fixture to kind of captain Lukaku in. But the thing about Ronaldo is that if he also bangs against Newcastle, he faces West Ham and Aston Villa next, whereas Lukaku, I think, goes to City and another tougher opposition. So it's not really that much of a dilemma if Lukaku ends up banging. I don't think he'll have too many price rises, but with Ronaldo, I think he absolutely will. And that's why I think I probably would recommend going with Ronaldo instead of Lukaku. I'm going to talk about the bench quickly because, as I always say, the bench is the most boring part of any draft. And throughout these drafts, I'll be quickly running through the bench because most of these managers are similar to my thinking, where if you're going to be using a wildcard or setting up a new team, you put as much money into your starting 11 as possible and you leave your bench as cheap as possible. But I do think you still need a couple of options there that are going to come in clutch if you manage to not have a full starting 11, like a Luke Ayling, for example, that Mikel also makes use of. But the rest of the bench is pretty cheap. He's got Gillespie, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, as a 4.0 goalkeeper, nothing much to talk about there. And he also has a Marty and Perica on the bench. The only thing about a Marty that I would probably recommend is don't go for him, because I think now that Leicester have had an international break, most of the first choice centre backs are going to be back in that starting 11. I don't think a Marty is going to find himself playing that much, and that's how I probably would recommend going for someone like a Brandon Williams. Yes, he does play for Norwich, but he does come in at 4.0 as well, and he's probably going to play the majority of minutes. Perica, he's not going to play any single minutes because he has departed the Premier League as of yet, so I don't think you should be looking at him as an option. Maybe look at a Scarlett at 4.5. I know he won't play, but I mean at least he has a chance of playing because he still is in the Premier League. Now going on to the starting 11, which is all you guys do care about. Going to start off in goal, and I really do kind of like this defensive setup. It is a little bit on the cheap side in terms of Duffy, but unfortunately that's just the situation that you are in. The thing to note about Duffy though is that if you need a player to simply play game week 4 and has a relatively good fixture, I would probably recommend him. I don't think for the long term he's the best option to go for, but he does come in cheap, and you will have Luke Ayling to come on for the majority of the upcoming game weeks because Leeds fixtures do take a turn after game week 4, and from game week 5 onwards they do look quite strong. So Duffy, perfectly fine with going in if you want some kind of Brighton coverage, but I wouldn't really recommend him as a long-term option because we do have a lot of Brighton centre-backs that are currently out injured, and after this international break, I'm expecting the majority of them to find their way back into the starting 11, and I think that Duffy might be dropped then. But on current form, if you need him for the short term, 100% kind of go for him, as I think he has looked quite good. Although Brighton's defence hasn't been as solid as maybe people have been expecting, I do think for at least the short term, Duffy will play because he's been in quite good form. Going on to the goalkeeper, Sarr, the Wolves goalkeeper, comes in at 5.0 million, and unfortunately that's the only kind of thing that I don't really like about him, is that he is 5.0 million. And when you do look at the other Wolves defenders, I'm thinking of a Semedo or Cody, they do come in cheaper than the Wolves goalkeeper, and that's the only thing that I think is kind of leading me to not really recommend him. I would probably try and fit Semedo in here because he is cheaper than him, and I just think that the kind of attacking threat of Semedo in that back 5, that wing back position, really outweighs the save points that Sarr might get, because you are still relying on clean sheets obviously, but it's kind of a save point versus an attacking returns debate, and I think Semedo just offers so much more of an attacking threat than Sarr offers from save points. So I would really recommend him, but I can understand what happened with Mikel. He kind of had Sarr, he had Duffy, he wanted to have Sanchez and Semedo, but maybe he couldn't afford them. But maybe that's just something that he has to look at, and I would really recommend kind of trying to fit in Semedo, or maybe even just going for Connor Cody. I mean, off those set pieces, he does offer a little bit of a threat. I think he has scored about 1 goal in 3 seasons though, so not the most attacking threat, but at least he is kind of in and around the box on those set pieces. The next 2 defenders I've simply no problem with. We have Luca Dinho. It might be a little bit controversial because obviously Mikel doesn't have Luke Shaw, but I think in the upcoming game weeks, Everton's fixtures far outweigh United's, and we already spoke about kind of with Ronaldo that from game week 7 onwards, United's fixtures don't look that strong, but maybe what I would say is maybe bring Luke Shaw in here for the short term, and then from game week 7 onwards, you can simply just change him to either an Everton asset, or you could go for one of the Chelsea options around that 5.5 bracket. Trent Alexander-Arnold, nothing to kind of worry about there. I would really recommend going for him. I think at 7.5, he still offers some good value. And I think the upcoming fixtures for Liverpool do look strong. And I mean, Trent has just been so advanced in that kind of a setup that Liverpool play. And because teams simply just park the bus against Liverpool the majority of times, I think that Trent can get in those advanced positions and even play as almost a midfielder in the majority of games. The one thing I also wanted to add about Luca Dinho is that I think that Everton's defense is going to get a lot stronger now that Ben Godfrey is back in training. I think he'll offer quite a lot of security at that centre-back position, and I think that'll only bode well for Luca Dinho's kind of clean sheet odds. Going on to the midfield, Mikel has opted for a 5 in midfield, a 3-5-2 formation overall. I do actually like this formation. For me, if I was to wildcard, it's kind of a debate between a 3-4-3 and a 3-5-2. It kind of depends on that fifth midfielder. Do they hold more value than that third attacker? And that's what you guys have to kind of contemplate. Maybe look up some predicted points. Maybe that'll help you with your decisions. But I think right now I currently am leaning towards the midfielder slot. And I think once kind of a Ben Rama starts the Europa League, once a Greenwood kind of offers a place on the bench, then we might switch to that 3-4-3 formation. But in terms of the 5 in midfield, we've got a nice selection here. Starting off with Ben Rama from West Ham. I think the majority of kind of wildcarders that I've seen have maybe opted to not go with Ben Rama. The simple fact of that is that West Ham have actually been quite busy in the transfer window, or at least the latter stages of the transfer window, and we have seen some more attacking midfielders kind of find their way into that West Ham squad. And the thing that you also must remember is that West Ham will be starting the Europa League relatively soon. I think it might even be this midweek that the Europa League and Champions League do start, and some people are actually worried about some potential rotation within that West Ham starting 11. So that's the only reason why Ben Rama hasn't really been featuring in most drafts, but if he does manage to nail down a spot still, he has been in great form, so you would generally think so. If he's going to be nailed for the majority of Prem minutes, I think at 6.2, whatever he is right now, is absolute gold, and he really looks like a great asset going forward. The thing that's also nice is that West Ham have been playing really well at the moment, so I also think they offer that in-form kind of advantage, and I mean, Ben Rama at that price is simply gold as long as he is going to play. The next midfielder is going to be Rafinha, and my kind of recommendation, if I was to wildcard or at least try and wildcard, is that I would probably hold off for Rafinha as long as possible, because we do have some kind of speculation about whether he's actually banned or not. So that's one thing that you guys must keep in mind, but I will update you guys throughout the videos this week about the situation. But the current situation is that FIFA might actually ban these players from their domestic leagues for 1 or 2 games because they obviously didn't travel for those international qualifiers. But I will update you guys. I don't want to put too much speculation right now, but with Rafinha, although he has that speculation, he also has Liverpool up next, which isn't generally the best fixture in the world. So if you can hold off for Rafinha for one more game week and then bring him in game week 5, that would probably be the best scenario. But the thing about the wildcard is that you kind of don't want to plan short-term transfers. I can perfectly understand if you guys want to go for Rafinha on a wildcard because you want him for the long term or at least the medium term anyways. So you might as well just bring him in game week 4 and hope he gets something against Liverpool. So I have no problem with this move, but as I said, maybe the best scenario would be to bring in another 1 week punt and then take Rafinha for game week 5 onwards. We then have a Liverpool double up of Salah and Jota. Salah, nothing much to talk about there. I would recommend having him because Liverpool's fixtures do look great and he always is a captaincy option depending on the fixture. But then with Jota, we have an interesting scenario here, and Jota is probably the only scenario where I think I might actually consider the wild card is if Firmino was going to be out for quite a number of weeks. We have some news, but we don't really have much clarity. Apparently he went for one scan and he was going to go for a follow-up, but we haven't really heard about that follow-up scan. But if Firmino is going to be out for a prolonged amount of time, Jota 100% will be in my squad because from an attacking point of view, even though he doesn't play as many minutes, his stats compete with Mo Salah and Sadio Mane anyways. I mean, he's just a great option even off the bench. So imagine if he's going to start most games for Liverpool. Absolute gold there at about 7.6 million. So I think that I would definitely recommend him if Firmino is going to be out, but obviously if Firmino is going to be back in 1 or 2 game weeks, it doesn't make much sense to bring him in. Then the final player is going to be Greenwood, a player that I would recommend maybe for the short term because I do think that once he kind of dips in form, I think Oli will bench him because they just have such a plethora of options in that wide and forward positions now that Ronaldo is signed. So Greenwood, I would recommend him for short term, but the nice thing about him is game week 7 onwards, United's fixtures are bad anyways, so you probably will take him out game week 7 anyway. So I would recommend maybe going for him for 3 game weeks and then always ship him out to other options, maybe even a Chelsea option like a Mason Mount. Now going on to the forward line, I really do recommend going with Antonio because if he plays, he gets FPL points and that's just the simple fact of the matter. So I still would recommend going with Antonio, but the option that we have kind of discussed early on in the video was Lukaku versus Ronaldo. I would recommend going with Ronaldo then downgrading, but if you want to go for Lukaku, 100% fine. I just don't really like those Chelsea fixtures over the next 2 of game week 5 and game week 6. But overall, I really like Mikel's team. Just 1 or 2 changes that I probably would make. But overall, I really like the structure. And I really can appreciate going for a 3-5-2 because I think it will provide the most value as possible. So now we're going to go into the next couple of drafts, and don't worry, I won't be kind of touching on players that I've already spoken about because I've already discussed them, so no kind of point at talking about them anymore. So we'll probably only talk about the main talking points and the main kind of changes that these managers have made. So the next draft is going to be from Too Much FPL. You never can have too much FPL, don't worry, I can assure you that, but I can understand that kind of a tag or the Twitter handle that you have chosen there. But this draft, I have titled it the No Trent because that's obviously the biggest talking point that Too Much FPL has gone for. Nothing much to talk about on the bench. The only thing I will probably highlight is that if you guys want to go for a cheap option, Livramento is a great option to go for as he does look nailed in that Southampton lineup. So recommend him if you guys want to go for another cheap option. But going on to the changes of this draft, the big one, I've named the draft after this, it's the No Trent draft. And if you look at the rest of the starting 11, you can kind of understand why Too Much FPL has not gone for Trent. And that's because he's opted for Lukaku and Ronaldo and also Salah as his 3 premium assets. So I don't really know how I kind of stand on this. I've mentioned in the previous one that I think at least 2 premiums is perfectly fine. But if Too Much FPL comes to me and says he's got a captaincy rotation, he wants to captain Ronaldo this week, Salah the next 2, and then maybe Ronaldo the next 3, and then back to Lukaku, I would understand it. But I think if you generally map out your captaincy, you'll notice that you're either probably going to go for Ronaldo or Lukaku in the short term. And that's why I would say I would probably only afford one of them, and then I would rather bring in a Trent or someone like that in the defense to kind of shore up the team a little bit, as I think Trent is still a great option to go for, even though you might not captain him. But the changes that Too Much FPL has made in his defense is that he has seen a return of Sanchez, in my opinion, the best 4.5 goalkeeper. You guys can go for anyone that you want. I've seen Bachmann in some people's drafts. I've seen other options to go for, maybe a Brentford goalkeeper, but I still think I trust Sanchez quite well, and he also has combined him with Duffy as a double up against Brentford. Luke Shaw has had a return here, which I'm perfectly fine with. High ownership, a little bit of safety there. If Luke Shaw manages to bang, you probably will be on the receiving end of some negative points if you don't own him. So I still think Luke Shaw is perfectly fine to go for at least the next 3 fixtures from a United point of view. But then we do have a Wolves option in the kind of outfield, or at least an outfield defender, and Marcel from Wolves. At 4.5, I can understand the appeal of him, but I would kind of heed a little bit of caution here with Marcel because he has been a little bit injury prone and also some rotation has occurred in the previous season. So if you guys want to go for a 4.5 option, although he does offer that attacking threat from a fullback or wingback position, I would probably recommend going with a Connor Cody as just a little bit of security, because the last thing you guys want to do on a wild card is kind of in the next couple game weeks have to transfer out Marcel, because one, he's either injured or he's become a rotation risk. So that's why I think Cody, if you want to go for a 4.5 defender from Wolves, go for him rather. But if you want to go for Marcel and take the risk, I also understand that, to be honest. Now, Too Much FPL has gone for a 3-4-3 formation, and I have seen more of the template 3-4-3s here because that seems to be the formation that most wildcarders are going for. So in the 4 in midfield, we have had a return of Adama Traore here. So I really do like Traore because just how good those Wolves fixtures are looking. So I can perfectly understand wanting to go for him. And if you guys have watched the opening 3 fixtures, just looks like an absolute insane kind of dribbler. It's just unfortunately that final product is a little bit lacking. But you got to think with these fixtures coming up against easier oppositions, Wolves will find their shooting boots. And that's why I think taking a little bit of a punt on a wild card is perfectly fine. And if you're going to be taking a punt, I think it has to be on a Wolves attacker. We then have that continuation from last draft of Salah, Greenwood, and also Diego Jota. And the only change up front is that we now have 3 attackers, and the attacker that has been incorporated here is going to be Cristiano Ronaldo. Kind of no question marks about Ronaldo. The only thing about him is that some people don't know if he's going to start or not. I think all you have to do is wait and see on that. I reckon that Oli will come out in his press conference and say that Ronaldo is going to be playing, because just think about it, that's going to raise the hype at Old Trafford. If they know he's going to start, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a packed crowd, and I think they're going to sell even more shirts after the record-breaking shirts that they have already sold. So Ronaldo, I think we'll get much more news on him because it is kind of a very hyped topic. A lot of talk has been about him, and I'm pretty sure the journalist that breaks the news that he does start is going to get quite a lot of retweets and likes over on Twitter. So it's going to be kind of a competition between the journalists to get that news. So don't worry about it too much. We'll be getting news about him. The only thing to say about Too Much FPL's draft is the kind of a debate about 3 premium assets. Would he kind of be better off just going for a Trent, a nailed player that's going to probably get returns over the opening couple game weeks? Maybe. I think that's the thing I probably would go for, but I can honestly understand going for Lukaku and Ronaldo, because if you are wildcarding, you just see those game week 4 fixtures of Aston Villa and Newcastle at home, and you see FL points in the kind of headlights. But I would recommend maybe looking a little bit more into the future and maybe bring up that captaincy rotation plan and just assess it. So now going on to FPL Ready's draft, and I've simply just titled it Solid because I think this is quite a solid template draft, to be honest. So not kind of downgrading the other drafts that we have covered, but I simply think that if you're going to be wildcarding, this is a really good template to kind of use, and then just maybe vary some players, maybe downgrade one or two options to get that perfect draft in your opinion. So starting off with the bench, the one thing I will kind of talk about is the 4.5 option on your bench, which is Sissoko, and I really do like him as an option. Obviously just signed for Watford and does come in at 4.5, so you got to assume if he signed for Watford, he's going to play the majority of minutes, and I think he does offer some attacking threat. Now at 4.5, probably going to be on your bench most single game weeks, but I think there's not too much between these 4.5s, but if you want to go for a different one, maybe you can look at Sissoko. So most of these positions in this lineup are very template, as I said in the introduction, and that's why I do think it's quite solid, because although you want to use the wild card and you want to get those differentials in, you don't want to be too kind of differential because you are using the wild card at quite an early stage of the season. So Sanchez, Luke Shaw, Trent Alexander-Arnold, very similar to kind of most people's defenses, to be honest. We do have a variation here though. We do have Semedo, who as a Wolves defender is my personal favorite. So at 4.9 has at a price drop, so you guys can afford him for slightly cheaper than he came in, or at least started the season with. And I would recommend going with Semedo if you want a Wolves option, because I do think he's nailed and also offers that attacking threat. Going on to the midfield, we do have Greenwood and Salah, who we've spoken about before, but now we do have two new additions. The first one, Ferran Torres, who I'm actually surprised that I haven't seen in too many people's drafts, as I do consider him as quite a template wildcard pick. And the reason for that is he plays for Man City 1, and 2, he currently is their most favorite false 9, or even just 9 position right now, starting at that centre forward position for your City. I mean, any player that starts there is probably guaranteed to get FPL points. They simply just create so many chances, and if you do watch City, they love kind of cutting in from the wide positions and then passing it across goal, and the centre forward usually finishes those chances. We've seen Aguero for years now finish those chances, and it seems like Ferran Torres is taking up a similar spot to what Aguero did, and he's actually been performing quite well. So that's why I think, at least for the short term, medium term, Ferran Torres is a perfectly fine option to go for, as I can't really see Pep Guardiola benching him. And maybe when Kevin De Bruyne comes back, there might be some rotation there, but I think right now he's the favourite option to start at centre forward, and I think that's why you have to kind of go for him. Now I do understand the Man City fixtures aren't that great, and that's maybe why people haven't been choosing him, but if I was to wildcard, I probably would be looking at Torres at that 7.1 million mark. The final midfielder to go for is going to be a nice budget option. I think currently he's about 5.6 million, and that's going to be Damari Gray from Everton. Got off to a really good start of the season with Everton. I think he scored 2 goals if I remember correctly. So at 5.6, providing great value for money, and I do think those Everton fixtures are looking quite nice. So if you do need a cheaper kind of midfielder, I definitely would recommend him at that price point. Going to the striker department, this has been the template front three 100% of the time. It's Antonio, it's DCL, and then it's also going to be Ronaldo. So the only one we'll touch on is Calvert-Lewin, because he has been a new addition. Obviously, he does have that toe injury right now, pulled out of the England camp because of it. So I would just kind of monitor that situation, but I'm pretty sure he'll be fine to go for Burnley at home. And I mean, Burnley at home haven't been that great, so I think that Everton can kind of get a couple goals. And you got to think that Calvert-Lewin is going to be favourable to get a couple returns. It's actually quite interesting that Benitez has gone out and bought Rondon as maybe a backup for that centre forward position, but I don't think it's going to kind of worry DCL's minutes too much, and I can honestly see Calvert-Lewin starting the majority of the minutes in the upcoming game weeks. So as I said, if you are going to wildcard, I would probably use this as a template and then vary some positions depending on what you want to go for. If you want to downgrade DCL to a cheaper option, upgrade Damari Gray, that's 100% fine, but I would have a similar price structure to this and a similar amount of premiums. So now going on to the final draft, and the reason why it's the final draft is because it's quite maverick. So as you can see from the title there, it's no Salah, and Damien14273 has come up with an absolute maverick draft for us, and that's why I wanted to cover it last, because I think there's a lot of talking points to kind of go over and a lot of things that we can change. So starting off with the bench, nothing much to talk about there. The only thing, as I mentioned in the first draft, is I don't think I'd be going with a Marty, and I probably would bring in a Brandon Williams or someone like that, just because I think he's more nailed for at least the medium term. But in terms of the starting 11, there's a lot of things to talk about here, a lot of options, a lot of maverick differentials to go for, and that's probably the only problem I have with this. So the first thing, as you can see from the title there, no Mo Salah, and I can understand this if you don't want to captain Mo Salah, but if you do want to captain him at least once in the upcoming game weeks, Liverpool's fixtures are looking great, so I would highly doubt that Mo Salah isn't the best capture option in at least the upcoming fixtures, and that's why I think that's kind of the only reason why I wouldn't go with Salah, is if you don't want to captain him, but I can honestly not really say that you won't with those lovely Liverpool fixtures. And that's the only thing I would say about Mo Salah though, and that's why I probably wouldn't go without him. But I can understand if you want to go from maybe you don't really like Liverpool, on a fan of Mo Salah, but from an FPL point of view, that's my first recommendation, is just get Mo Salah back in this lineup, and at least you can afford him with some downgrades in some other departments. And the next talking point is going to be kind of on this Maverick aspect, the differentials that you kind of have gone for. And I did mention it in an earlier draft that just because you wildcarding doesn't mean you have to go super differential, and you are using an early wildcard, so I would still go semi-template with just a couple of options that you maybe couldn't afford if you used your free transfers. And the thing that Damien has done is that although he's gone differential, he's gone mega differential, because what he's done is he's gone for some new signings. And why I would heed caution on that is that, one, you don't even know if these options are going to play, because they might quarantine, they might have to isolate for a certain amount of time, and they might be integrated into that starting 11 a little bit later on. So let's look at the first player, for example. Tomiyasu just signed for Arsenal, and at that 4.5 bracket, you can simply just go for Ben White, who comes in cheaper and is more nailed. So that's who I would go for. The second option is going to be Emerson from Spurs. Now, I don't think Emerson probably will start the first game week. Now, I might be completely wrong on that. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but my expectation of Emerson is that he might play a game week 5 onwards or something like that. I think they'll wait a little bit. I don't even think he's trained with Spurs at the current moment. So I wouldn't recommend going with Emerson. Go for maybe a Regulon if you want to afford a Spurs option, or maybe go for someone else like a Semedo. I just don't think I'll be looking at the Spurs assets right now, especially because their fixes do change from game week 5 onwards. They go into the midfield with the biggest kind of a dropout is going to be Mo Salah, so I don't really like the midfield to start off with, but the options that you have gone for are a little bit interesting. The first one's going to be Pogba. I personally prefer Greenwood, at least for the short term, but I can understand if you are maybe a United fan, want to go for Pogba, but I probably wouldn't go for him. And then you have gone for Saw, perfectly fine with that move at 6 million, great value for money. Traore, similar. It's just Heung-min Son that I don't know. If you don't want to captain Heung-min Son in game week 4, then I don't really know why you do have him in your lineup. I would simply just try fit Mo Salah in, try find that 2.5 somewhere else, maybe downgrade a Pogba to a cheaper option, someone like that, so that you can afford that Son to Salah upgrade, because I just don't know why you have Son if you're not going to want to captain him, because he also kind of falls into that kind of premium price bracket. And I think with Spurs fixtures kind of changing in the upcoming game weeks, I probably wouldn't recommend a Spurs attacker. But then going on to the front line, kind of no problems there. I can perfectly understand this front line to go for. You've gone for Ronaldo, Lukaku. I don't really favor that. I probably would downgrade one of these and then upgrade Son to Salah. That's probably your first initial move to do. That's probably the one I would recommend doing. And I think I'd probably stick with Ronaldo for the foreseeable future. And then you can just downgrade him in game week 7 to Lukaku. So overall, I can understand maybe why you've gone for these moves. Maybe you've got off to a bad start or something like that, Damien. I don't really know the context. But I think you've gone too differential. And on an early wild card, you don't necessarily have to be pressured to go differential. And you can still go with options that are template, as then probably will return some points at least for the short term. But this is basically wrap the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Apologies, it has been a little bit of a longer one, but hopefully you guys have paid attention throughout the video and it hasn't been too boring. But I'll be seeing you guys tomorrow for more of a template wildcard draft, and I'll talk about the options that are going to be in that one. So please like the video if you did enjoy it, and subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. And I'm going to be signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.